Imagine a man who built an empire, whose hands shaped skyscrapers, and whose name echoed through the corridors of power. But what if the greatest lesson of his life didn't come from a boardroom, but from a forgotten alley, where the light of hope seemed to have been extinguished? Does true wealth reside only in bank accounts and luxurious properties? Or can the shock of a brutal reality awaken a dormant humanity, capable of redefining the very meaning of success? The answer for many is a silent reminder that the heart, at times, is the greatest treasure, and that compassion can be the most valuable currency. Yes, fortune can open doors, but empathy opens souls. William Sterling, the man who negotiated with presidents and dictated market trends, stood there, paralyzed. The fine dust dancing in the sunbeams that streamed through the crack in the door seemed denser, more real than any financial statement I had ever analyzed. The girl, with her dark hair carelessly tied back and a simple dress, continued to sew, oblivious to my presence. Her small, nimble fingers handled the fabric with a precision that spoke of years of practice, not play. What was she doing? For whom? And why, in the name of everything I considered valuable, was a child working with such intensity instead of being at school or playing? My voice, usually firm and authoritative, came out as a hoarse whisper. "Girl!" I called, and she startled, lifting her head. Her deep brown eyes were large and carried a seriousness that did not belong to her age. There was no pleading, just a momentary surprise, followed by an almost adult resignation. She didn't try to hide what she was doing, nor did she apologize. She just looked at me, waiting. The silence between us was filled only by the distant hum of the city and the echo of my own conscience, which was beginning to stir in an uncomfortable way. I, who had always seen people as numbers on spreadsheets, was faced with an equation I didn't know how to solve. That gaze, devoid of artifice, was a mirror reflecting a part of me I had buried under layers of ambition and success. The girl's voice, when it finally came, was as small as her figure, but carried a dignity that disarmed me even further. "Is the rent overdue, sir?" she asked, without averting her gaze, as if she already knew the reason for my presence. There was no plea, just a cold acceptance of reality. I, the magnate accustomed to negotiating billions, found myself speechless before that brutal simplicity. My throat was dry. "Yes," I managed to stammer, feeling strangely ashamed. "Your mother, where is she?" She pointed to a dark room at the back of the house. "She's sick, sir. 4 months. She can't work." I'm trying to help. The sewing machine, an old, noisy model, seemed like a monster devouring her childhood. What was she sewing? Small fabric scraps, transformed into what looked like dolls or small toys. "To sell," she explained, as if reading my thoughts. "At the local market. It's not much, but it helps." With each word, the image of my empire, my luxury cars, my mansions, seemed to shrink, becoming insignificant in the face of that silent, desperate struggle. I, who had always prided myself on my ability to see opportunities in every crisis, was blind to the human crisis unfolding right under my nose, on one of my own properties done not formed in my stomach. It wasn't anger over the overdue rent, nor frustration at the inefficiency of my managers. It was something deeper, a discomfort that came from a long-forgotten place. I remembered a time, long before the expensive suits and private jets, when scarcity was a constant shadow in my own home. The image of my mother, sewing by dim light to support the family, flashed in my mind. I had worked hard to erase those memories, to build a fortress of wealth that would protect me from any vulnerability. But there it was, personified in that girl, the fragility of life I had tried so hard to forget. "What's your name?" I asked, my voice a little firmer now, but still lacking its usual authority. "Lily," she replied, and for the first time, a slight tremor passed through her lips. She seemed to expect a reprimand, an ultimatum. But I had none. My mind, accustomed to calculating profits and losses, was in a whirlwind. What to do? Evict them? That idea, which before would have been a cold, calculated business decision, now seemed monstrous. Offer money? It would be charity, a temporary solution that wouldn't address the root of the problem, and that in some way would diminish the child's dignity. Knelt down, trying to meet her eyes, a gesture I had never made for anyone, except perhaps an important investor. "Lily," I said, trying to soften my tone. "You shouldn't be doing this. You should be in school." She lowered her gaze to her hands, which now rested on the fabric. "There's no money for school, sir. And Mom needs me." The simplicity of her answer was a blow. There was no self-pity, just the harsh truth. That was her world, a world where childhood was an unattainable luxury, wasn't there to collect, but to witness and perhaps to learn. That silence, which once bothered me, now invited me to a deep reflection. I stood up, feeling the weight of my own insignificance before that silent strength. My eyes scanned the simple room, the sewing machine, the unfinished dolls. A decision, different from all the ones I had ever made in my business life, began to form in my mind. It wasn't about money, but about something far more valuable. I left Lily's house without another word about the rent. The humid heat of the inner-city neighborhood, which before had seemed merely an annoyance, now suffocated me. The air felt heavy with injustice. I got into my armored car, but the comfort of the air conditioning and leather seats brought me no relief. The image of Lily, her serious eyes and exhausted hands, was etched into my retina. She was a ghost, a silent accusation that haunted me. The drive back to the luxury hotel, where I was staying, seemed longer than usual. Every skyscraper I saw, every enterprise I had built, now seemed like a monument to my own blindness, and the presidential suite, with its panoramic view of the city I had helped shape, the opulence felt empty. For the first time in decades, sleep eluded me. My mind, which had always functioned as a relentless calculating machine, was now in a frenzy of questions. What was I doing with my life? With my fortune? I had accumulated billions, but for what? To have more properties, more power, while children like Lily struggled to survive in my own domains. The irony was cruel, the hypocrisy, unbearable. I called my executive assistant, David, at 3 a.m. He answered with a sleepy voice, accustomed to my eccentric hours, but not to the tone of urgency I used. David, my voice was hoarse, I want all the data on the families living in my rental properties in this city. Especially those with children. And I want a detailed report on their living conditions. By yesterday. He, a man of few questions, simply replied with a yes, Mr. Sterling. But I knew he sensed the change in my tone, and the following days, the routine of William Sterling, the billionaire, was turned upside down. Meetings about mergers and acquisitions were replaced by analyses of social data. Financial reports gave way to dossiers on poverty and access to education. The image of Lily never left me. She was the catalyst, the small spark that ignited a fire in my soul. I could no longer ignore it. I could no longer pretend I didn't see. That overdue rent was not just a debt. It was a cry, a call that I, in my ivory tower, had finally heard. The decision I had begun to form in Lily's house was taking shape, and it was much bigger than just helping one family. It was about redefining the purpose of an entire life. David, with his usual efficiency, delivered the reports in record time. Piles of documents, graphs, and photographs filled my mahogany desk. Each page was a punch to the gut. Entire families living in precarious conditions, children out of school, sick parents without access to treatment. The scale of the problem was overwhelming, much larger than Lily's small house. I had built an empire on land, but ignored the lives unfolding on it. Guilt, a feeling I rarely allowed in my life, now gnawed at me. I saw the numbers, but now behind each statistic, I saw a face, a story. A Lily in my mind, trained to solve complex business problems, began to work in a new direction. This wasn't about charity, about a one-time donation to ease my conscience. That was a palliative. I needed a systemic solution, something that could break the cycle of poverty, that offered dignity and real opportunities. I thought about my resources, my influence, my ability to mobilize people and capital. If I could build skyscrapers, why couldn't I build a future for these children? The idea, initially a whisper, began to gain volume, transforming into an audacious plan. Spent sleepless nights, no longer with profit spreadsheets, but with maps of the city, identifying the most vulnerable areas, the schools that needed support, the health centers that barely functioned. My team of lawyers and consultants, accustomed to handling multi-million-dollar mergers and acquisitions, was summoned for a new mission, to research models of social development, education programs, and community health. They looked at me with a mixture of confusion and respect, realizing that the old William was in a new phase, one they hadn't foreseen. The image of Lily, sewing exhaustedly, was the driving force behind every new idea. She represented all the invisible children, all the lives I had inadvertently neglected. I didn't just want to pay her rent, I wanted to ensure that no other Lily would need to sew to survive. I wanted them to have the chance to dream, to study, to play. That was my new project, the biggest of all. It wouldn't be easy. I knew I would face bureaucracy, skepticism, and perhaps even resistance. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a genuine passion, a purpose that went beyond the accumulation of wealth. I was building something that would not be measured in dollars, but in transformed lives. And the first life I wanted to transform was that of that girl, Lily, who, unknowingly, had shown me the way to my own redemption. The first concrete action was the hardest. Returning to Lily's house. Not as the collecting landlord, but as someone seeking a connection. I brought David with me, so he could witness the reality I had discovered. The door was closed, but not locked. I knocked gently. Lily opened it, her eyes wide at seeing me again. There was a mixture of apprehension and childlike curiosity. "Sir?" she asked, her voice still small. I knelt down again, this time with a smile I didn't know I still possessed. "Hello, Lily. I didn't come for the rent today. I came to talk." She led me inside, and the smell of mold and dampness was almost imperceptible to me now, overshadowed by the presence of Lily's mother, lying on a mattress in the corner, coughing faintly. The woman, thin and pale, opened her eyes and looked at me with a mixture of shame and fear. "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice weak. "I'm so sorry about the rent. I swear as soon as I get better." I interrupted her, raising my hand. "Don't worry about it, madam. The rent is paid. Indefinitely." The shock in her eyes was palpable, and Lily beside her seemed unable to believe what she heard. I explained to them, with as much delicacy as I could, that I wanted to help. Not just with the rent, but with her mother's health and Lily's education. I spoke about a new project I was starting in this neighborhood, a project to give opportunities to children like her. Lily's mother began to cry, tears of relief streaming down her face. Lily, in turn, looked at me with an intensity that made me feel the responsibility of my new purpose. She didn't cry, but her eyes shone with a hope I had never seen, and the following months, this neglected district became my new battlefield. Not against competitors, but against poverty and lack of opportunities. I bought and renovated an old abandoned warehouse, transforming it into a community center. I hired teachers, doctors, and social workers. The Sterling Institute for Social Development was born, with the mission of offering quality education, medical care, and professional training programs for the most needy families in the city. David, my faithful assistant, was by my side, coordinating logistics, dealing with local bureaucracy, and at times, reminding me that I still had an empire to manage. But my focus was there, on the dusty streets of this district. Lily was one of the first to enroll in the Institute school. Seeing her in a clean uniform, a new backpack, and a genuine smile on her face was a reward that surpassed any financial gain. Her mother, with proper medical treatment, began to recover slowly. Lily's sewing machine was now used to create pieces for the Institute's bazaar, where she taught other children to sew, sharing her skill. I spent hours at the Institute, watching the children learn, the parents participate in workshops, the community flourish. That place, once a ruined warehouse, was now a beacon of hope to my life had changed radically. Meetings in New York and London still happened, but now they were interspersed with visits to this district, with discussions about school curricula and health programs. My billionaire colleagues, at first, looked at me strangely, some with pity, others with veiled skepticism. "William's getting sentimental," I heard. But I didn't care. I had found something that money by itself could never buy, a purpose that filled me in a way that the accumulation of wealth never could. That was just the beginning. There was much more to be done, many more lilies to be reached, many more futures to be built. The expansion of the Sterling Institute was not without obstacles. Local bureaucracy, a labyrinth of paperwork and permits, tested my patience like no billion-dollar negotiation ever had. There was resistance from some politicians, who viewed my initiative with suspicion, perhaps fearing a loss of control or the exposure of their own negligence. David, with his sharp diplomacy, became my shield and my sword, navigating murky waters and opening doors that for others would remain closed. He, who was once merely an order-taker, now proved to be a partner, a confidant who shared my vision, though still with a pragmatism that kept me grounded in reality. News of the Institute spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. More and more families knocked on our door, seeking a chance. The demand was immense, and resources, even mine, seemed finite in the face of such great need. I realized I couldn't do it alone. It was time to mobilize my old world, the world of big business, for a different cause. I organized a gala dinner in New York, an event that, for my peers, would be just another opportunity for networking and a display of power. But for me, it was a chance to sow a new idea on stage. Before hundreds of businesspeople and investors, I didn't talk about profits or emerging markets. I talked about Lily. I talked about the sewing machine, the exhausted eyes, the dignity amidst misery. I talked about the children of this district, the sick mother, the stolen childhood. My voice, which was once used to persuade about investments, now spoke of humanity, social responsibility, of a legacy that went beyond wealth. There was a heavy silence in the room, a silence of shock and, for some, discomfort. But then, one by one, they began to stand up. Not to applaud, but to commit. Donations began to pour in, not just money, but expertise, volunteers, resources. The initial skepticism gave way to a wave of support that surprised me. Lily, meanwhile, flourished at the Institute. She was not just a brilliant student, she became a small leader. With her mother recovered and working as a volunteer in the Institute's kitchen, Lily dedicated her free time to helping younger children with reading and writing. Her sewing skill, once a burden, transformed into a passion. She began to create small uniforms for the Institute's theater plays, and her dolls, once sold at the local market for a few pennies, were now proudly displayed in a small bazaar within the community center, with the proceeds going towards purchasing materials. Seeing her smile, a genuine carefree smile, was my greatest reward. That smile was the fuel that drove me. I had spent my life building empires of concrete and steel, but now I was building something much more enduring, an empire of hope. Newspaper headlines, which once celebrated my billion-dollar acquisitions, now spoke of the philanthropy billionaire, of William of the inner city. I wasn't seeking recognition, but the attention the Institute received brought more support, more resources. The transformation was not just in the lives of the children, but in my own. I felt more alive, more connected, more human than I had ever been in my entire life as a magnate. But the journey was far from over. This district was just the beginning. There were other cities, other Lilies, other brutal realities waiting for a spark of hope. And I, William Sterling, the man who once collected rents, was now determined to build bridges, tear down walls, and sow opportunities where there had once been only despair. The years passed, and the Sterling Institute for Social Development became a model, a benchmark. What began as a response to a personal shock in this inner-city neighborhood expanded to other needy communities across the nation. David, who was once my assistant, was now the CEO of the Sterling Foundation, a robust and respected entity that managed projects with the same precision we once applied to business. He had become as passionate an advocate as I was, his worldview also transformed by proximity to the reality we once ignored. Lily, the girl from the sewing machine, grew up. She was no longer the exhausted child, but a brilliant young woman, with an even deeper gaze, but now full of knowledge and determination. She graduated with honors from college, with a full scholarship from the Institute, and chose to return to her old neighborhood. Not to sew dolls out of necessity, but to become one of the Institute's project coordinators, dedicating her life to ensuring that other children had the opportunities she almost missed. Seeing her lead with the same dignity that impressed me years ago, was living proof that the true investment was not in properties, but in people and my own health, which I had neglected for decades in the name of work, was now a priority. I spent more time in the community than in New York, more time with the children of the Institute than in board meetings. Money, which was once the end, became the means. My fortune, once a symbol of personal power, was now a tool for social transformation. I had found a peace that material wealth never provided me. That day in the small house in this neglected district was not just the day I collected rent. It was the day my life, and the lives of many, began to be rewritten. The legacy I was building now was not of skyscrapers, but of smiles, of futures, of hope. And with each new project, each new child reached, I knew that the journey, though long, was worth every step. William and Lily's journey touched your heart and made you reflect on the true value of life. Consider joining our community. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more inspiring stories like this, which remind us of the power of compassion and transformation. Your subscription helps us continue sharing light and hope.